All right,
we're going to get started here.
Yeah, this was like 12 months.
Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. This is Editors Are Users 2, Designing Content Management Systems for a Positive User Experience. I'm Chris Hallahan. I know content management systems, that's everyone's favorite topic, especially after lunch. So I'll try to keep it interesting. And it should be something that's important to you. And hopefully after this, you start to see some of that value that CMS can bring to your designs. So again, I'm Chris Hallahan. I'm a user experience designer. I work with students at IdeaBase, which is an agency in downtown Kent. We're part of the College of Communication and Information, which is part of Kent State University. At IdeaBase, we create design solutions for a variety of clients. We do development, design, user experience, usability testing as well. And we've built a variety of content management systems, most of them custom, as well as some with templated sites as well, like your Squarespaces, those kind of things. So I also teach classes where we work on real client projects. Right now we're building a site for the Kent Historical Society in a content management system. And really the goal here is to get students working collaboratively and seeing how disciplines cross within the communication and digital media. So you'll see some of that work and those insights come through today. So we do client work, so I want to start with a short story. I received a call from a past client, someone that I hadn't worked with. They worked with the agency previously, and the person who edited their website has taken another job. They're no longer with the company. And so she calls me and says, I know you're not familiar with the site, but can you walk me through? I'm adding a news article to my website. And all I'm going to do is add a pull quote into the story. It has like a little design around it with a headshot of the person who said the quotation. Can you walk me through this? I'm having trouble. So I said, okay, let's look at this. What kind of instructions did you receive? And she relays back to me the 6-step process to add this pull quote into the article. So I have to open Photoshop and create a new graphic with the right size and dimensions, add that photo text treatment, export the graphics knowing the correct dimensions and quality, upload the graphic into, if they're using WordPress, into their media editor, go into the HTML mode and set the image to the right, with the H space and B space around it, and the alt text, and then save and hope everything works because there really wasn't a preview mode. So this would be a daunting task for anyone, any one of us, especially somebody who really isn't used to working on websites. And we've seen this. This is not an uncommon experience that people are often forced to go through when editing their websites. So you can see why the editing experience matters. And many of the times when clients come to us, they come to us not because they maybe hate the content on their site or the design, they hate the editing experience. They want a better experience so I can go in and it's not a frustrating or daunting task to edit my website. What seems it's such a simple thing turns out to be really complex for people. So the problem is most times the editing experience, the CMS, the content management, is left up purely to the technical or the development team. The UX team, the content strategists aren't involved in the process. So how can we get involved in that process? Well, I'll talk about that in a second. Let's go back for a second and talk about what is a content management system. For those who are unfamiliar, these are simply pieces of software that allow a typical user, hopefully non-technical, to go in and edit pieces of digital content. Typically that's through a website, but it could also be for mobile applications or any kind of content endpoint. It really doesn't matter. And many CMSs will output that content into a variety of media, which is important to remember. And this is not a stagnant field, it is growing. So the market is estimated to go from about 5 billion in 2017 to around 10 billion in 2022. So there are a lot of people out there creating these systems, hopefully getting people to purchase them, or even creating them in-house. It's not a stagnant field. And there are the usual suspects in this field. So you have your WordPress, Drupal in the open source world. You also have ones like Cascade, SharePoint from Microsoft. The list goes on and on. And the goal of this talk isn't to help you choose the best content management system. I'm not going to give you, this is my recommendation, because every organization's needs are completely different. And also these systems can be built so they're very easy to use, and they can also be customized so they are really difficult to use. So there is no one best system to use, but what I am going to give you are some practical ways that you can go about knowing what questions to ask when you're working with the development or technical people, and knowing what's possible. So if somebody says, we can't do that, that's impossible, you say, well, I just saw it, in this presentation, it is possible. So the one I'm going to demo at the beginning or the end of the presentation is called Craft CMS, which is what we use in our agency, but this can be really applied anywhere. So typical CMS out of the box, this is a Drupal editing page. You probably have all seen something like this. You have this basic title field and a WYSIWYG body field where the content goes, whatever that content might be. And this is the out of the box experience. It looks pretty simple. But what happens is we add on additional functionality for whatever we need through themes, plugins. We customize the fields. It becomes a monster of a CMS pretty quickly. So this is Drupal. This is a screenshot from a WordPress site, a real client site for the contact page. And I'm going to scroll down in a second. You can see it's getting, there's a lot going on though already in the left sidebar. And in the editor there. Let's scroll down and we have like SEO plugins, some modules, additional plugins that we're not using, inactive widgets, social media sharing, contextual links. We're at the end. So that's just one page on this site that I may be forced to navigate, knowing really nothing about the system. And if you think about it, we wouldn't put all this these extra links, this extra information that the users simply don't need to see on our customer-facing website. So why do we put them in the content management system that our editors who drive that content have to deal with this every day? So the editing experience matters. What can we get with a better editing experience? So I've broken it down to 4 things. The first is, of course, less support costs and time. That's as the developer, but also as a company. I don't have to constantly take support calls, or as my IT department, I don't have to support every time somebody needs to make a change, right? So that's an obvious one. In turn, if I have a better experience, I'm going to create hopefully better content. I go into the system, with a positive attitude rather than this is just something, a chore I have to do. It's going to produce better content. It also empowers the editor, so we can allow for a more flexible experience. If we allow some flexibility with the editor, they're going to be a lot happier. They can make changes. They can structure the content how they'd like, as opposed to, this is the structure we've given you and you better like it kind of thing, which is how a lot of CMSs are, right? They're inflexible. And then in turn, creating a higher quality design, because we're providing limited flexibility, but not allowing them to break things. They're not breaking the design systems or the information architecture systems that we set out in place. We're kind of having them play in some limited parameters, which of course is a more consistent, higher quality design. But it really does come down to that time equals money kind of thing, right? So speed and simplicity in workflow is paramount. How can we make the workflow really fast and easy, a great experience for that editor who has a lot of other things to be doing and may not even be dedicated to the website. Maybe they're an administrative assistant or a salesperson or from the marketing team. Maybe this isn't their primary responsibility. So how do we create this better user experience which gets us better content, better design? I'm going to go through 4 things real quick, and then we'll see some of them in action at the end of this. So the first one is collaborative planning. We need to collaborate and work together to even create the system, even before it's created. We need to allow, again, for flexible editing. I'll show you some ways we can allow for that. We need to rely on automation. We're, of course, using very advanced software. We have a lot of capabilities right within the software where we can really speed things up. And finally, providing contextual training right within the user interface. So I don't have to read outside documentation every time I want to do something. So let's talk about collaborative planning, first point here. So it's really key that you get involved early in the process. So not just for the technical people, but also the content strategists and the UX designers. They need to be in those conversations where you're actually planning out the content management system. It's so important that purchasing and configuration decisions just don't go through the IT department, who are typically maybe checking off a list of features. Features really don't matter if they're not useful or usable by the end user. Who cares about features? Let's look for what do we need as an organization and what's our workflow as far as content. So understand how the organization works, what are your pain points now, and where are you going. That's going to future-proof the CMS into the future. So talk to your users. Remember, the users, again, are the editors in this case. Document using user-centered design principles. Those same principles we use in the external alliances also apply to the internal. The next thing we need to do is look at this content and break it down into pieces. And this is the process called content modeling. If you're in the CMS world, you may have heard this term before. It's all about looking at our design templates and our content and breaking it into what are called fields. And we all use fields all the time. They're the little text boxes or radio buttons where we enter information or select options. And this is no different for a design like a news article. So I'm going to take this news article. This is a mock-up for Sketch. And it looks like one single piece, but it's really several pieces, right? We need to look at that main headline, the author and date, the short headline or the sub-headline, introductory text. These are all the pieces that we need to work through and plan out with our designers. And the news article is something really easy for us to understand. Most people kind of grasp this, so I want to use this throughout the presentation. The news article itself is known as a content type, and then the little pieces are known as the fields that make up that content type. So I'll be coming back to those words throughout the presentation. So again, when you look at this, it may look like one blob of content, but it's not. It's several pieces. And this goes directly back into the editing experience. We can't just provide a single title field and a single body field to our editors. That's very inflexible. It doesn't allow us to omit things, change the design if we want to through CSS, or display the design differently through different devices, mobile devices, but also devices that haven't even been announced or have come out yet. So break up the content. Typically we use a spreadsheet. First of all, we'll have all the content types along the left side, and then we'll plan out what are all the pieces that make up this content, but also how is the content related to each other. So for our news article example, we may have other news articles we want to feature as related that come in. How do those connect with that? How do the staff members, the writers in the organization, if we want to bring in the author's name, can we connect those? So think about not only the fields, but the relationships. So when you do that, you kind of end up with the fields, like I was talking about, the pieces. It might look like this, where you have the user add a new news article in this case, and you have all those different fields in the CMS. Now, a content management system like Drupal, open source, it does this really well out of the box. It has fields, content types, that's exactly how it's set up. A system like WordPress does not do so good at this. It has basically posts and pages out of the box, right? So you have to think about how do I turn a CMS that maybe isn't set up for good content modeling into something that has this kind of model. So if you're using something like WordPress, a plugin like Advanced Custom Fields is critical for this. If you're not using that, I highly recommend it. You got to turn the CMS into something that allows for content types and separate fields within the content. No more blobs of content, as they call it in the WYSIWYG editor. So structured content means content is stored based on what it means rather than what the end presentation is. And this is a key part of web design, is separating content from presentation, because presentation changes, good content should stay and can be reused over and over again, no matter how many times we redesign our website in the future. And many of you have probably gone through multiple redesigns. It seems like it happens every few years. So we need to set up the content so that it will live on through different designs and through different devices. So collaborative planning, though, really taking the time to understand the editorial workflow, breaking down the process, and also the content itself through content modeling is a really key first step. If you're not involved here, we can't go on to the next step, which is flexible editing. So flexible editing, there's a few things here to make that editing experience very intuitive, but also to allow some choice, not so rigid that the user can't make changes or customizations as needed. As part of this editing experience, though, one key principle is if we're requiring the editors to touch code or add any kind of HTML, CSS, inline JavaScript, we've already failed. No touching the code. We don't need our content editors to also be developers. We should have done that work ahead of time via our templates. So users shouldn't have to go into the source mode. This is what the source mode looks like, and be able to mess around in the WYSIWYG with all these inline styles. It's messy HTML. We don't want that. We want it to be structured so that I don't even turn this mode on in most cases unless you have advanced users that really need it. But for your general user, they don't need to be in here. They can do it all with text. And the reason is because these things, again, can be very easily, it's very easily error prone. They can mess up the template, the interface, and they're not reusable. I can't change the design easily again because it's all been hard coded right into the content. So we shouldn't be looking at that. Even things like embedding videos from something like YouTube, we can automate this as well using just the YouTube URL, the public URL. We don't have to mess with iframe embed code, which you're all familiar with. That's even one step too much, in my opinion. The other thing, and I'll show you that in a second, is planning consistent and intuitive field labels and ordering. Structuring the fields in terms of, what's the general order somebody would expect them to go in if I were interacting with this content as the end user is really helpful. But we also have to think about the terms we use. Are these terms recognizable by the editors, or are we using jargon from like programming language, basically, to label the fields in the CMS? So if we, again, take that news article and actually develop it into the content management system, you can see that some of these things are pretty common. I think most of you would be able to understand these labels just by looking at them. If not, there is some explanatory text, some help text underneath them. But things like title, subheadline, the author, the introductory text, the article body, and related articles. Pretty intuitive. We're not using any kind of jargon that's unfamiliar to somebody who hasn't been trained on the CMS. And it kind of goes in a logical order, right? We don't have the subheadline at the very bottom of the flow. It makes sense that the subheadline would come after the title. One thing to keep in mind is the fields that come after the article body may be missed because people are really focused on getting the main body field filled out, and then they ignore the things underneath it. So if something is really critical or required, I'd recommend moving up above the main body, the main text, or whatever that content type is. So field order and presentation matters. Use your good IA principles that we've talked about today. Also providing flexibility. This is another one. So a common misconception is that a CMS is completely locked down. I can't customize anything. I can't do anything if it's not built into the template. That's simply not true. There are a lot of options we can give people in terms of layout. in terms of the content I want to include per article. So maybe I want this news article to appear a bit differently than another news article I'm doing because it's a different kind of content. We can give people options. And when you think about these options, think about breaking down the parts of the news article or whatever content it is into blocks. And this block approach is used throughout a lot of CMSs these days. So say we have the text block and then we have the image block. They're in this order by default, but I should allow the user to swap those if I want the image above the text because it makes more sense there in context. So I should be able to do that. I should also be able to just remove the image or not include the image caption if I don't want one. So allowing for some flexibility. If something's required, of course, you can make it a required field, but everything doesn't need to be required in this case. And a lot of other CMSs are getting into this block-based approach. WordPress is doing something with their Project Gutenberg, very similar, where you can insert blocks within the body field, whether it's an image, text, heading, things like that. So that's coming. It's a bit controversial right now because it really changes the core editing experience for WordPress, but it is something that is really promising if done right. So the block-based approach, and they've taken some cues from places like Squarespace, does this really well. This contextual block-based approach to editing where I can add on things that I need and remove the things that I don't. Have some flexibility there. And flexibility can go onto layout. It can also go onto color choices as well. We can give users flexibility there. Notice that I'm not saying that we're allowing them to just go into the CSS and add their own custom styles on to override our colors. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying let's provide maybe a dark and a light theme option to choose from. So we have that flexibility, but we have some structure in place so we can't go outside of, say, our brand standards. And then finally, on this point, providing a preview mode. It's really important as we're building our content that we can actually see what it's going to look like so that we don't have to save it or make it public and then go back and quickly make changes, to correct whatever mistakes we made. Provide some kind of really functional preview mode. The out-of-box preview mode on a lot of CMSs today is really poor. It won't show like the styles in place on the content, so you can't actually see what the content's going to look like when it's actually in production. So it needs to be a really high quality preview of what that content's going to look like. Squarespace does a really good job of this in their editor. You can switch between device types at the top even. So like a standard mobile, tablet, and desktop view. So not only am I seeing what it's going to look like on my computer where I'm editing, I can see on different devices as well. So a really nice preview. Crafts, which we'll look at, does a kind of side-by-side preview where you have the content you're editing and the preview live updating on the right. So again, and you can resize this window for various screen sizes. So that's really helpful to see because people have a hard time mapping this to what it's going to look like. Where is that subheadline going to actually appear when it's published? You really need to give them that context. Yes, sir.
So related to this, what are your thoughts on the live editing CMSs?
Like Squarespace is one of them where you can just edit it in place. I don't think that's a bad thing for text. It's a little troubling because it does frame the website as a page and everything as individual pages, and that's not always true, right? Not all content lives on that page. It may be coming from somewhere else. So I think to an extent, if done right, it is really helpful and intuitive because people understand I click here and I can edit it directly. But there is some danger in establishing the wrong principles, like all the content that's here when it's really not the case. We're bringing content from all over the site and it's coming together to form that end page. So there's some work certainly that could be done there, and I think it's helpful from a usability perspective. We just have to be careful. Yeah, thank you. So flexible editing, though, creating a balanced, flexible, and intuitive editing interface that empowers rather than just restricts the editor. Number 3 is automation. So again, we're using machines. We can automate a lot of the process. First is reusing content, going back to content reuse, which we were just talking about. I've already created content one place in the system. If you're recreating or retyping the information out somewhere else, you're not taking into consideration the power of a content management system. We should never be duplicating content in 2 or 3 different places, which will take twice or 3 times as long as well. We need to reuse. So if we go back to the news article, when we add the author who wrote the article, we may already have the authors, their bios listed in another part of the site. So when we hit add author, it should populate the people that already exist in the system, and I simply choose their name. This also allows me to, in my template, create a link back to their profile automatically, and perhaps bring in their headshot right into the CMS because I've created that link now between the two. So never recreating content that already exists. Drupal does something similar using something called Analyzer, where you can basically add an existing node to another page and then display it as like a teaser or full content. So just piping it in from elsewhere on the site instead of recreating it. So never recreate something that already exists. Second, using symbolic URLs. If we use what's called a symbolic URL, which means we're not typing www.whatever.com/, we are able to make changes to the URL and have them automatically update throughout the entire CMS. So never hard coding URLs into the CMS. When we want to link to something on our site, we should provide an interface to search for the content, and then we get what's called a unique identifier, which is like a universal number that never changes. So if the URL changes for that particular page, and that it doesn't matter because we've done a symbolic link into that content. So never be typing URLs that go somewhere internally in your website. These URLs break all the time. It's always a #1 cause of 404s. We want to customize the URL. That page goes away. We can do a lot using symbolic links. And finally, using the power of automation for content publishing. When we make a change, adding, removing, updating content, this should set up a chain of events throughout the website from that point, so we don't have to touch that content in multiple places. So when we add a project to Ideabase's site, for example, that project shows up on the home page. It also shows up under our featured work page and also on the all work page, and is properly categorized automatically. We didn't have to go in and touch every one of those pages. It popped in there because it's the latest piece of work that we've added. So one change sets off that change of events automatically. Think if you had to go into every one of these pages, which some people do, and have to add the thumbnail, add the title, add the link 3 different times. Horrible process if you have to do it. So we don't have to do this. Let the machine take care of it. And forcing functions. Letting the machine prevent the user from actually making a mistake or editing something they shouldn't, or imposing some kind of restriction. This could include character limits, minimum or maximum number of entries that you're allowed, required fields or size restrictions. It's also removing options that are dangerous or what we don't need. So options in the WYSIWYG editor. Why do we need all these toolbar icons? I mentioned I removed the source code from the WYSIWYG. If it's not there, they can't get in there and mess around with the code. So removing what doesn't need to be there. We can also remove things based on roles. So if somebody is an editor role, remove all of the administrative crap that they don't need to deal with within the CMS. Just give them those core fields that they actually need. So trim down things like the editor, offering only the ability to add basic HTML elements, for example. You're going to have a lot fewer problems to deal with. Going from something at the top, way too much, to something that's just right. All this person needs to be able to do is bold, italicize, underline, add some heading styles, lists, unordered and ordered lists, and add links within that content. Take away the stuff that they don't need. It's going to really help. And then things like I just mentioned character limits, let the person know how many characters they have left. In this case, my sub-headline, I don't want them writing an entire story right within the sub-headline, so I'm going to impose some automatic restrictions that stop them. And then the big one, handling images intelligently. You know, our systems, our websites are so image heavy these days, and images are probably the biggest problem for content editors. I mentioned having to go into Photoshop. Users shouldn't have to go into Photoshop, in my opinion. They should just provide the original image. Give me the original image that I need. The system should automate the process of preparing that image into, let's say, multiple crop sizes, one for mobile, one for a tablet size screen, and one that's more landscape cropped for a desktop screen. And it's also going to downsize and compress these images so that they load really efficiently. With things like responsive images in HTML, we can automatically swap these things out depending on what size screen or what device the person is on. Again, the editor just needs to provide that original image from the digital camera. We're going to go in and actually, through automation, provide all those crops. And all the major CMSs provide these options. This is not something that's new. So let the tech handle common tasks when possible and prevent any actions that are just simply going to break the interface through forcing functions. And then finally, before I show you some of these things in action, contextual training. You know, you built the editing experience, you planned it out, you provide some automation, and you can provide a training manual at the end. Here's how you do common things. But what happens with those manuals? They get lost. People leave the company all the time, right? New people are coming in. All they want to do is log in and edit stuff in the CMS. So how can we do that? Well, one thing here is having clients participate early on in the process. So don't wait until the very end of the project to have your stakeholders, your clients, come in and actually utilize the interface. You're not going to understand what the problems are until they actually go in and start editing content. So even before the site launches, get in there as the content editor or have your stakeholders get in there and start adding content. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll add one news article, say, okay, now it's your turn. So you have 20 articles to add. Why don't you practice by adding those 20 articles yourself? Take some work out of my workload, get them some training early on, and I get to see, maybe this field isn't quite right, or I'm missing this functionality. Get them in there ahead of time, working with you in the CMS. And then finally, providing contextual documentation. We know, again, people aren't going to read that PDF manual or find it. How can we provide help right within the user interface where the person's working? So things like help text are really super helpful here. Explaining what the meaning of this field is, where it's going to be used. If there's some place where I need to go to edit this content that's not this field, where do I go in the interface? So provide that training right within the interface instead of making you reference a separate document. Now, there are some plugins out there that will let you build training right into the dashboard of the content management system, which I also think is an interesting idea. Again, it's putting it where the user actually is versus in an external document that no one's going to really read. Nobody likes reading documentation except for me. So contextual training involving clients and stakeholders in the editing process prior to launch, and provide contextual documentation right within the user interface. And so those are the four main items that I think lead to a better user experience. What I want to do, especially around items 2 and 3, is show you some of these in practice. We're going to do a little live demo here so you can see that these things are actually possible. And we're going to edit that news article that I was just showing you throughout the presentation. So let me turn on mirroring here. Okay. And we're going to go into our CMS. Again, I'm using Crap CMS for the demo. These should apply to really everything. The interfaces look different. The principles are exactly the same. Okay, so I have my CMS here, and I'm going to add a news article, because that's what I chose to call it, news article, very intuitive. So I'll call it post. What the heck is a post? That's more of a blog post. So news article. Here's my existing articles that are already in the system. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new one of those. And you see the fields that we looked at here before. Now, as a content editor, I probably have a folder with all the stuff that needs to go into the CMS. So I probably have my text, for example. And it's a good idea to get the editors actually working like this, where they're breaking their content up into pieces according to how they might put them into the CMS, rather than just one big Word document of text. Have them be thinking ahead of how this is going to be broken up. Okay, so I got my text here. I also have two images I want to put in here. And you can see these are the original images. So I have 1.5 megabytes and 3.9 megabytes. Way too big for the web, but who cares? We're going to let the system automate that process. So let's act like the content editor here. And I mentioned that good preview is important. So we have this live preview in Craft, very similar in some other systems as well. So you can see exactly what we're doing as we edit. So I'm going to flip back and forth here. So I need my headline, of course, and my sub-headline, right? And you can start to see it being built here. Notice too that it can show me how it's going to lay out on different screen sizes. It's really important. It's not just a desktop site. It's showing me my character account, so I have 33 characters left on this line. I'm going to choose an author. Again, the authors already exist in the system, so I don't need to manually type a person's name. I'm just going to pick myself here. You can see that it's pulled in automatically my profile picture, because that's already in the system, and it's linking to my profile, so I can see maybe more articles this person has written. All right, and you can see that it's also, there's no feature image yet that's been selected. That's okay. Let's allow for some flexibility here. So no image, no problem. I'm going to fill it in with a pattern in the background. But if you do want an image, let's go ahead and throw in an image here, and I'm going to add in this one here. Okay, so I uploaded that image. Again, it's 3.5 megabytes. Throw it in there. And what has the system done? It's automatically cropped it. And I can prove that to you by resizing this. You can see that the crops are all automatic. And if I were to inspect it, you'd see that it's a really low file size because they compress automatically as well. So I created all the crops. Looks great. It also put like a little tint on top of that image. No need to make the user go into Photoshop and add those tints themselves. Intro text, I'm going to throw that in here because I want it to be styled a little differently than the main body, which is down here. Now the main body is cool. Again, I want to add some flexibility. So if I want to have some text, for example, as part of the article, let's say we want a quote, going back to the full quote example. I want a quote within my article body. I'm going to go ahead and put in the quote text and also the author of that quote. You can see how easy that was. That those little quotation marks, that little treatment, the colors, everything, that comes in from the style sheet. And why can we do that? It's because we separated that quote into its own field. I'm going to continue with my next paragraph now because I want that to come here. And I'm in charge. And maybe I want a little image in between here. So I'm going to add a inline image, not within the editor, but as its own field. Let me choose this one here. Okay. And I have this little tint over top of it. Why? Because I think it looks cool. But no caption, no problem. If I want a photo caption, I can add one. The interface should adjust accordingly. And then I'm going to end with one final graph below that to end my story. And then I would like a video demonstrating my process. The video, again, I'm not going to require the person to get the embed code. Who wants the embed code? We want just the video URL. Everyone knows how to get a YouTube URL from their address bar. So we're going to paste that in. The system, again, should take care of pulling in the embed code. It's a real video, by the way, just to prove that.
Hey, Chris,
Yes, sir.
does this particular system or any other systems you know of pull out URL parameters that are unnecessary, like referrals and things like that? Could screw up analytics if it's accurately put in.
You can customize how the embed code actually is formed in the HTML. So if you don't want, I'm not sure about the referrals, but you do have some customization there. And you can also say like, do I want the byline or the stuff on top of the video that YouTube tends to put on. So there's a lot of customization, but you as the developer would define, maybe not the editor themselves. Okay, so I have a pretty cool looking article here. I'm also going to add in some tags for, let's say, UX. And because there's other articles with the UX tag, it's going to bring those in as related articles. Because why not? We'll just match up the other articles that have related tags. I didn't have to do anything to get that started. So I got my article here. See that. I can actually view what it might look like again at different screen sizes. So those fields allow me to be flexible. They allow for different display of the content. And you can see that the fields were pretty intuitive. I didn't show linking, but if I wanted to link to another entry, that's symbolic linking. I can find another news article. I'm never putting in URLs. That's going to keep that URL always working no matter what happens. All right, and one thing I didn't show is you should allow that flexibility again with moving around the content. So maybe I really hate that image there. I want it at the end. Not a problem. We can take the image and move it down below the video, right? Flexibility, I'm not locked into one design pattern. I can make changes. And then another thing I added for fun was this little color scheme thing. So maybe I don't like the light color scheme. Let them choose the dark color scheme. Switch between the two. Really simple. All that's doing is just changing a class on the HTML from light to dark. Pretty simple. Two different style sheets. So hopefully you see some of the things that are possible in a CMS that makes it really easy to use, really flexible, really intuitive, and it also prevents some of those errors that you see, some of the downfalls. I'm not allowing the person to do anything that I don't want them to. I'm only giving them the options that they actually need. So that's all part of creating that positive user experience in a CMS. And I could go on forever about the benefits of building this way, but wanted to see if anyone had any questions as we wrap up. Yes, sir.
How long did it take you as a developer to set up the CMS that way?
Well, I set this up yesterday,
Okay.
but I've been working with it
Sure.
for quite a bit. But I did that particular template in about 8 hours or so.
Okay.
So not a lot of time. It's really just doing standard HTML, CSS, and then putting the fields in from the CMS as placeholders in terms of the content. So the CMS, even as the developer, should do a lot of that work for you, even the developer. If you're looking at these and saying, my CMS can't do any of this, or is really, really old, maybe it is time to evaluate a new CMS that you might use for your work, or your client's work. But I'll tell you that a lot of these have plugins and functionality that allow for these things. It's just kind of knowing where to look and building it correctly. Any other questions that I can help with before we head out? Yes, yeah.
Are there additional features that you would allow for power users that are still safe and locked down to the set?
I would probably give them more control in the editor by roles. So I might give them that's the source, just because they might need to fix something. That sometimes the WYSIWYG gets things wrong. I'd also give them maybe the search engine optimization stuff, do you need the description, metadata, and stuff like that, depending on their level of comfort. It's important. So, and then of course they have control over the backend user interface as well, the add fields and remove fields, things like that. But I wouldn't let anyone from the editing team actually touch the backend, just because it's a little dangerous to be able to get in there and change around fields and things like that. But I would say if you can't do it as a developer, or you need to go into the code to do it, it may be worth looking at that as a feature that you may turn into the user interface. If you can't do something, chances are maybe somebody else wants to do it. So build it in a way that other people can actually just use it through the UI instead of doing code. So I think that's a good indicator. Yes. Other questions?
You had mentioned a plugin for WordPress.
Oh, yes.
earlier.
Advanced custom fields will let you define content types. They call them post types in WordPress. Separate post types depending on the type of content, and then also the fields that are associated with them, and the relationships between the fields. So I can do things like pull from other posts into this post, so content reuse. Really, in my opinion, it should just be part of the default, setup. Like I install it, the next step after installing WordPress. That's just my opinion. Some other people might think differently. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the Gutenberg editor.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Looks like WordPress is finally trying to go towards other modern CMSs with that block approach. And I was wondering, how do you get access to that?
I don't know a ton, but I know that it is available as a plugin right now, so, but it will be baked into core either upcoming or very soon. But right now you can install it as a plugin and use it. But yeah, it's going to let you kind of segment out the content into the blocks a bit better instead of that kind of nasty body field that we want to get away from. That is the WordPress default. Yeah, I would take a look at some of the videos. They have a Gutenberg website that kind of shows you the editing process.
Okay.
But I mentioned it is controversial because WordPress has been around for so long and kind of has that set process, way of doing things. Any other questions? Get the next person started, I think, at 2:15 or so. So thank you all. Let me know if you have questions. You can find me online, chrishallahan.com or see Hallahan. Thanks. Hey, how are you doing? Relaxed.
We have two options. That would work for me.
Yeah, that's one. They also had this. Yeah. They had the wireless thing. That was only USB.
No, that's not a good option.
I think
It'll
it's
carry on with telling you that.
Yeah.
Good job, Chris. See you later, man. I'll see you soon. Yeah.
I'm not sure like my specific.
Yeah, that's totally.
Yes.
Find the question mark.
And there's totally different, exactly.
So what part of term wins?
I work on conversations. I have been there for a little over a year. You like it?
I heard good things about this. I was curious. I started there.
I gotta run over to my office. I have to grab something.
Some of the positions it's from.
Yeah.
And then my manager just got a job there. So, and, CRM.
Okay. What's considered?
So you have good build websites.
Yeah.
People talk.
Get that 100%.
Well, I'm in the office.
I know.
I've been in badly interested in talking to
Right.
Then, I started off.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I really like this.
I'm going, Jim.
Good, how are you?
Good, I saw you. How's your day going?
Good.
Yeah?
Yeah. Looking for a good talk. See you in a bit.